Welcome in to Daily Faceoff Live, your go-to source for everything hockey. Live every weekday at noon Eastern.
Welcome into another playoff edition of Daily Faceoff Live, brought to you by Bet365. Our partner for the 2024 playoffs will be here with Bet365 to provide you all the news, analysis, lines, and betting options for the playoffs until just one team is left standing at the end of June. Tyler Yaremchuk and Frank Seravalli with you. Frank, what a night last night in the Stanley Cup playoffs. One team keeps their season alive in an elimination game. Another team, it kind of feels like they kept their season alive, even though it wasn't an elimination game.
What a night in Edmonton, to quote the late Bob Cole. I mean, look, that's everything you want in a playoff game. It was close. It was tight. There was a blown lead. And then I looked at the person sitting next to me in the press box last night after the Oilers gave up that lead with 1:41 to go. And I said, I don't think we're getting OT. I mean, you see teams all the time sit back on their heels. Hey, we're going to play for OT. Not the Oilers, not last night, not in Game 4.
No, we'll be joined by Carter Hutton in a little bit with the Blue Pain. A lot of interesting goaltending situations around the league to talk with Hutz about. Also, we are looking for your inbox questions over on the Daily Faceoff YouTube, Frank. But let's kick off the show and stay right here in Edmonton. The Bouch Bomb, just a minute 2 after the Canucks tie it up. Evan Bouchard sends the crowd into a frenzy and ultimately sends the crowd home happy in Edmonton. He ties the series up at 2 with this game winner. Just first on Evan Bouchard, this is hardly a breakout playoffs for Evan Bouchard, but when you go sort by points per game all time amongst defensemen in the playoffs, he is very, very high up that list. And this guy has come through a handful of times, never mind this year, over the last number of years for the Edmonton Oilers.
Did he have the most quiet 80-point season that no one really talked about outside of Edmonton?
Well, and I think part of it too is because they sit there, or a lot of people just go, yeah, he racks up the power play points with McDavid, and they just shrug it off. But I mean, again, that moment last night, his release from the blue line, his ability to get pucks through traffic, his ability to shift his body and make forwards just totally miss, even in tight spaces. It's remarkable.
Well, how about the way that Bouchard and that pair with Ekholm controlled 63% of the play? I mean, You could talk about their defensive metrics as well. And just as a pair, how dangerous they've been at both ends of the ice. Last night was the first game that Ekholm hadn't scored on this series.
Yeah.
I mean, think about that. He's been a tremendous pickup for the Oilers over these last 2 playoff runs. And the two of them together, we'll talk about the ability for the Oilers to change up their pairs later in the game as they made some switches, moved Darnell Nurse to play with Vinny Desharnais, but they were in a fantastic spot in large ways due to the way that they defended last night.
Yeah, and that was a big part of it. That wasn't a game where the Oilers just relied on their power play and their high-end offense or anything like that. And they got contributions from different guys.
Evander Kane on the forecheck to create that goal certainly deserves a lot of credit. He showed up really kind of for the first time this series. He had a much better game.
Yep.
And from Jump Street in Game 4 for the Oilers, that was the big change for me. You saw Game 3, they get punched in the mouth by Dakota Joshua and the Canucks 3 times on the first shift. That didn't happen this time. And they were ready to play to try and even up this series. They knew what going down 3-1 would mean.
Just to close it out on Evan Bouchard, no player has played more at 5-on-5 so far in this series than Evan Bouchard in his 84 minutes and 45 seconds. When he's been on the ice in those 84 minutes, the Oilers have outshot the Canucks 48-15 and outscored them 5-1. Again, he gets minutes with the Oilers' big guns, but that doesn't take away from just how good Bouchard is at pushing the play in the right direction.
Yeah, but what I would say is those numbers are heavily skewed by a 13-minute stretch in the third period where all 5 of those guys were on the ice uniformly together in Game 2, where you control play for that long, your numbers are going to pile up.
Yeah.
That's what's going to happen. But the fact that all 5 of them together play in sync and play so well, I think it's a game changer.
The Oilers win a low-scoring hockey game, and
might have predicted that yesterday.
Yeah, you did. I took the over. I was wrong on that, Frank. But Calvin Pickard was good in that hockey game. And he didn't have to be exceptional. He didn't have to make any sort of flipping around paddle saves or anything like that, but he was solid. And that's all the Oilers needed.
I think what kind of bothers me one day later is how everyone just kind of looks at it and says, oh, Stuart Skinner was awful. This was the obvious choice.
Mm-hmm.
No, Skinner was the safe choice. To turn to a 32-year-old journeyman who hasn't been good enough to play in the NHL and hasn't been important enough to an organization to even start AHL playoff games over the last 10 years. This is a guy that's played 5 total playoff games in the last 15 years.
Yeah.
At any level, at the pro ranks. So you throw him into the deep end of the pool in the Stanley Cup playoffs, making his first career playoff start, and at the same time, you're potentially betting another spring of Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl magic on Cal Pickard, the guy that is picked up off the scrap heap in free agency, making $762,500. I mean, I wrote it today and I said it and people laughed and it's for effect, but Chris Knobloch, their coach, has balls the size of an Athabasca oil sands dump truck. I mean, that's the truth. To make that call in that situation. And what I like most about it is, yes, it was a bet on Pickard. He also hasn't played since April 18th. So almost a month out from his last game action. If you want to count the 3 shots that he saw in the third period of game 3. I'm sorry. The puck wasn't even in the Oilers' end that game, the third period. So it doesn't matter. So hasn't played. And then this trickle down effect that happens from that. And part of it is you bet on, you didn't like the play of Skinner and you bet on Pickard. But the other part of it is you're betting on the way your team has defended. And Chris Knobloch said after game 3, actually after last night's game, that he knew that his team had given up the fewest scoring chances against and the fewest high danger chances against of any team still standing in the Stanley Cup playoffs. So number 1 in the NHL in these playoffs in those 2 categories. When you are allowing less than 25 shots every game and they're not great quality from your opposition in this series, that allows you to maybe, do something a little bit different than the norm. But then I mentioned the trickle down effect. And what does that mean? So the Oilers were able to get stops, which means that for the first time since game 1, they were able to play with a lead. And then because they had a lead, then they could dial back Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl, who played 6.5 minutes fewer in game 4 than they did in both of the previous 2 games, 2 and 3. So they get a rest. That means, hey, by the way, they're fresh for the final minute of the game if you want to push the pace and go score. And it also allows you to tinker with some other things. Edmonton can experiment then with the defense changes that we were talking about on their pairs. So there's this whole thing. Once you get stops, it makes your life easier. Thank you, Captain Obvious. I understand that that's part of it, but everything else for the Oilers is able to then fall into equilibrium because they're getting stops and because they're defending well.
Vincent Desharnais, 3rd most minutes on the Oilers blue line last night.
That pair was fantastic, by the way, to close out the game.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd be curious to see if they stick with it, but they also controlled 73% of the play, Nurse and Desharnais.
I want to flip it over.
Desharnais is what we'll call it, I guess.
I want to flip it over quickly. Rick Tocchet after the game says, quote, "We need 5 or 6 guys to get going here. I mean, it's the Stanley Cup playoffs. Got some guys. I don't know if they thought it was the playoffs. Who could Rick Tocchet be talking about?
He's legitimately talking about 5 to 7 guys.
Well, I was going to say to ask you it in a way that's maybe not putting.
Cole, Stanley Cup pedigree, tons of turnovers this series.
He's been bad.
We've seen Höglander already pulled from the lineup. Mikheyev is where scoring chances go to die. And what about Elias Pettersson? If you want to drive Rick Tocchet crazy, turn the puck over. Repeated turnovers, and it's not just a turnover because mistakes happen. It's getting rid of the puck flippantly or under pressure. And in a lot of cases for Elias Pettersson, looks like he's scared.
And that was what stood out to me yesterday.
At least 3 plays that I can think of where he had the puck on his stick and had an egregious turnover because he wanted to try and avoid contact.
Yeah.
And I don't know how you fix that in the Stanley Cup playoffs. At some point, teams are just going to be frothing at the mouth to try and crush you.
Yeah. There were a handful of passengers, the dreaded P word, in that Canucks lineup in game 4. They'll look to turn it around back on home ice tomorrow night in Vancouver. Frank, the other series that was in action last night, the Boston Bruins have kept their season alive. I thought their effort out of the gates, out shooting the Panthers 13-4 in the first period, was great. But the story here, when you look at this game recap, the story's Swayman, right?
I mean, the story all playoffs.
Yeah.
Swayman, right?
Yeah, I think you're bang on with that. I know our friends over at Morning Cup of Hockey, they titled their show today "Swayin' Alive" in Boston, and yeah, their netminder was a massive factor in that. You giving the Bruins any hope of rattling off another win? I mean, hey,
it only takes one to really.
And that's the thing. They're in the same spot as Carolina now, where, yeah, you don't have home ice advantage in the series, but now you get game 6 at home, and if the crowd can power you through a little bit and you win it, game 7s are always a coin flip.
I'm not betting on the Bruins. I think they've got too many flaws. I think they've been a mostly average team that's gotten really good goaltending. And I think the Canes have a much better chance, if you're asking me, of the two of them to force a game 7 and potentially win the series. I think Carolina's in a much better position to win 2 straight from here on in.
Couple of game 6s out east coming up in the next couple of days. Paul Maurice had some interesting comments. We'll get to those a little bit later on in the show as well. Before we get to our pal Carter Hutton, Frank, let's take a look at what's going on tonight in the Stanley Cup playoffs. It is just one game on tap, but it's an elimination game between Dallas and Colorado. 8 o'clock Eastern puck drop tonight. And I mean, Dallas just feels like they're so far ahead of Colorado, or they have been over these last 3 games. And I know in game 1, it was the big miraculous comeback from the Avs, and it was kind of like, okay, has some doubt maybe started to creep into Dallas here, and they just proved they're a wagon. They're that simple as that. They're resilient. I think mentally, with Pete DeBoer as their coach, they're not going to be unprepared or rattled at any point. I have a very hard time seeing Colorado flipping this script.
I'm with you, and I would say if they were going to teeter and go off the rails, it would have been after game 2, during game 2, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you're in that spot where you've got another lead again, and almost the same thing happens, but they're already battle scarred. They're already tested from what they went through against Vegas in round 1, that I think they've got a real advantage here if they can knock off the Colorado Avalanche and keep this a short series because of what's playing out in the other series. When you've got the Canucks and Oilers guaranteed to go to game 6 at least, you can get some rest. You can better position yourself. I've said it before. Every team that wins the Stanley Cup, you can almost uniformly look at this over the last 20 to 25 years. They've gotten at least one series along the way that they've made quick work of. And maybe that happens later in the playoffs, but it didn't happen in round 1. And yeah, it wasn't 7 games against the Golden Knights, but when you look at that ability to battle through that, it was a heavy lift in that series, right? And so that's something that they're going to have to take a look at and try and close this out. And I feel like they're in a good spot to do it because Colorado just seemed like they wilted after the Valeri Nichushkin suspension, and human nature is part of that, but I don't know. I think that really takes the wind out of your sails.
Yeah, I kind of agree with you on that. Obviously, the big guns have been good for the Avs. McKinnon, Rantanen, both with 3 goals, 9 assists in their 9 playoff games. But with Nichushkin out, they're going to need somebody lower in that lineup to start stepping up and producing.
And did I say they didn't get to game 7? Of course, they got to game 7. So
yeah.
Yeah, all these series are running together at this point.
It has been a wild spring in the Stanley Cup playoffs. One of the big storylines in this series as well is Georgiev versus Ottinger. Georgiev's been below 900 in 3 of the 4 games. Jake Ottinger is sliding right back into playoff Jake form.
Below 900 all season long. Yeah. 897 entering the playoffs. I don't know why we would expect something different this time around.
Yeah, not exactly surprising. Let's move along and get to the big segment today. It's the Blue Paint with Carter Hutton.
The
Blue Paint is fueled by Booster Juice. Download the new Booster Rewards app today to start earning berry points for delicious and nutritious smoothies, drinks, and food that will get you through the day, get you through those long days of covering playoff hockey. If you're Frank Seravalli, excited to welcome Carter Hutton back into the show, the former NHL goaltender. And Huts, let's start out in Edmonton, where it was Calvin Pickard stealing the show for the Oilers in Game 4 of their series against the Canucks. It's an interesting one. Frank and I talked about the gamble that they took going with him in Game 4 over Stuart Skinner. When you watch Pickard, his style is maybe a little bit off. Like, to me, he has a little bit of like Mike Smith in him, where sometimes the easy saves, they end up looking more difficult than they should be. What did you make of the decision, and what do you make of the way Pickard plays?
You know, I honestly love the decision. It's easy to look back now and enjoy the fruits of the labor of a guy like that, a veteran, you know, a guy similar to myself, right? He kind of worked his way in and he's has a lot of experience. For me, it's the fact that he has that experience now. It's not like this is a young guy you're throwing to the wolves, right? And Vancouver's kind of established this is the way they're going to play, right? They're not going to generate a ton of quality of chances and quantity of shots. And I think he goes in there and he just makes the timely saves. Even looking at last night, I think the two that go in are deflected. Nothing he can do about it. Yes, his style isn't as appeasing to the eye of some of the modern goalies, the guys that have grown up with the butterfly and the RVH, where Pickard, he is a puck stopper. He's a play reader. He has patience. And I think his experience and just his calmness last night to stay in the moment, stay with it, paid dividends for an Edmonton team that, you know, is going to score 3 or 4 goals a night. They just need their goalie to make a timely save here or there.
All right, Huts, let's look at the other side of this series, because Seelovs has been great, and he's been one of the great stories of this spring with the way that he's reeled off strong play. There really hasn't been too many moments so far in these playoffs that he's faltered. But my question for you is, Thatcher Demko's getting closer. He's now taking shots. He hasn't fully ramped it up to 100% yet, but we're getting to that point in the series where the Canucks season is going to be on the line pretty soon. Would you be tempted at all, if you're Rick Tocchet, even as well as Seelovs has played, to go to Demko at some point in the series?
You know, it's going to be tricky, right? Because now you're trying to catch a moving train, right? Demko's out, and this is playoff hockey, and this is probably one of the fastest teams in the NHL that's going to come at you and generate offense in the Edmonton Oilers. So for me, it's the fact of I think you have to see what happens here in Game 5, right? You know, it's still 2-2. You still have a chance. You got 2 more games at home potentially in that sense, right? If you lose the next one, then maybe you go to Demko depending on how Seelovs plays. But right now, it'd be very tough to make that move because he has been a difference maker and he's played very well. I think for Tocchet, and he's kind of been very clear about that, he needs some of these players to step up, and it's not necessarily about the goaltending. This is going to be a tricky decision. I think both these teams, looking back on this, saying the Canucks and Oilers were going to meet, who would have thought it would have been these two goalies going head-to-head in Game 4? But, you know, for me, I know Seelovs gets pegged as that number 3 goalie, but realistically, he is their number 2. He is their starter waiting in the wings. And his mental fortitude to deal with this and be in the playoffs and play this well, it's been very impressive to watch.
Out in that Colorado-Dallas series, it's been clear who the better goalie is. Jake Ottinger, exceptional once again. He's got the save percentage up at .923. What have you made of the way that this guy, again, you talk about Seelovs and how good and calm and poised he looks for a young goalie. It's easy to forget that, man, Jake Ottinger's still just 25 years old, and it feels like every time we get to the postseason, he finds a way to find another level.
Yeah, so this is kind of similar to what I see right now with Seelovs, right? He's 23 and he's having this great playoff run. And he's playing very well. Where Jake Ottinger, we look back on a few years ago when he had that series against Calgary, he was unbelievable. Where it's trickier sometimes because of expectations, right? He's a younger goalie. He doesn't have those expectations on him in the sense he's just going in and playing, where now Jake Ottinger has expectation. He is supposed to be the guy. He is a guy that is in that upper echelon, you know, a Team USA goalie, a Vezina candidate in a sense, right? He's always in that conversation where he didn't have a great regular season, right? We're talking about 54 games played and a .905 save percentage, which really aren't great numbers. And I think last time I was on, Frank, we kind of chatted about that at the end of the regular season. What's going on with Jake Ottinger? Where now he's got to that level where he's an elite. He's stepped his game up. And for me, it's the timely saves, right? He's great in the third period. He's been great in overtime. And this Dallas Stars team is playing a complete brand of hockey. And Jake Ottinger right now has been their best player, and it's been great to watch here.
I have a question, and maybe Ottinger will be your answer to this one, but we're going to talk a little way too early Conn Smythe in our next segment. But I wanted to float this your way. which goalie's been the most valuable to their team in the playoffs? Because I think you could look at Andre, yeah, like he's been great. You can say he's been their best player, but they also have a rock solid group in front of him on the blue line. They have a great group of forwards. You can go to the East, you can go to the West. Which goalie's been the most valuable to their team here in the playoffs?
You know, I could take the easy answer on Jake Ottinger here, but I'm going to stay out there. And I think, honestly, like, it's tough in the East right now. I think Igor Shesterkin, other than those 2 losses, has been absolutely rock solid too as well. But for value, for me, I think is Jeremy Swayman. I think the way he's played consistently across the board, especially in a situation where you had that 1A, 1B, he wasn't the guy that just had the keys to the castle, where he's dealt with a lot of pressure. And I think he's managed it so well. And just watching his game, the way he's so calm and he can just stay within himself, where I look at Shelov's moving around a lot. He chases the game. And I think that's very similar to what Jeremy Swayman was a few years ago. But now when you watch Jeremy Swayman, he looks like such a veteran. He's so mature, and he's really put himself in that upper echelon of like high-end number 1 goalies. And I think moving forward, you're going to see him run with it. And like we've seen so far, I think if the Bruins can come back in the series, he would be the guy that is, at the top of the list for me.
Huts, if it's going to be an early Conn Smythe pick, it can't be Swayman, can it? You got to make it past the second round.
Of course. But he's been the guy that's been most impressive. I said, Andrew, I was trying
value.
to go off the
You
board.
hit it right on the head. Which goalie has been most valuable? You got it. You nailed it.
Yeah, thanks, buddy. I thought you were being a little tough on me there, but honestly, there's so many storylines. It's great to watch, and there's been like that. It's like almost 1-tier goaltending and a 2nd tier, which has been down low. And I think these teams are really rewarded with the solid goaltending they're getting from those guys.
It's amazing just the difference in pedigree. Like you've got, Swayman and you've got Shesterkin and these guys that are going to be some of the very best in the league. And then you've got Pickard and Shelovs and these other guys that have just, Shelovs, no one really was talking about, even though he's well thought of in their organization. And then Pickard, like he's an afterthought at free agency. He's someone that is a nice, hey, break glass in case of emergency guy that the Oilers brought in, that it makes, as you said, the story so rewarding.
No, I agree, right? A very similar like story to my career, right? Like at points I just bounced around from team to team getting contract. And I was just one of those guys that's like, he'll be there. He's serviceable if we need him. And to be in there and what he's done this year, especially having a .909 save percentage for the Oilers during the regular season, which was huge, especially with the Jack Campbell situation. But I view the goaltending kind of like I view the playoffs in this sense. It's like, especially in the East, it was almost like there was a tier 1 of teams that were like the elite teams. Then there was a 2nd tier of level where you talk about the Bruins, the Leafs, and then maybe the next level down would be like the Islanders and Caps, where I think these teams that are going to have a chance to move forward, it's because of that goaltending has pushed them over the top. And it's always fun to see guys step out and really get it done come playoff time.
When you are in that spot, if you're Pickard and you're playing in, so you come in, you're a high draft pick, 2nd round, you make it into the NHL with the Avs, and you think you're going to be that guy that hangs on to a job. He said it last night. You think you're going to be there, and then 10 teams later, here you are, but you stop in Tucson and Grand Rapids and Bakersfield. How far away from the NHL, let alone starting in the playoffs, do you feel?
Far. Like at times it feels helpless, right? And I think I went through that earlier in my career. Obviously, I had a little more sustainability in NHL than Calvin has, but he's been a guy that's been serviceable. And the biggest thing that teams love about him is he's a locker room guy, right? He's going to go in, he's not going to stir the boat. He's not going to undermine Stuart Skinner. Even right now, like he's going to be there supporting Skinner, even knowing that he's taking the weight of this team and the city on his shoulders. He's going to be there. He's going to support him. And for me, it's kind of a win for goalies that are on the outside, right? You don't always have to be optically pleasing in the sense of, you're perfect and you're flawless. Cause there is so many goalies that are, where for him, he's just a battler, and his commitment to the team and his all around personality. It's great to see him getting rewarded right now.
It's like a golf swing, right? Like no one talks about the beauty of John Rahm's swing, but he's one of the best ball strikers.
Exactly. He gets it done. At the end of the day, you just got to stop the puck anyway. How?
Love that. Huts, always appreciate your time. That's been another edition of the Blue Paint powered by Booster Juice. Thanks, Huts.
No problem.
Moving along to our daily face-off inbox question, hashtag AskDFO. It's brought to you by Douglas Mattresses. Every order at douglas.ca/DFO comes with a free comfort sleep bundle, 2 memory foam pillows with pillow protectors, 1 luxurious cotton sheet set, and 1 mattress protector free with any mattress order. Order today at douglas.ca/DFO. Frank, Give me a way too early 3 names Conn Smythe watch list.
Man, I've spent zero time thinking about this.
Which is why I love asking you questions like this.
This is totally off the cuff. Leon Draisaitl is definitely on my list somewhere. 8 goals in 9 games, if my math is correct. That's been outstanding. I have a really hard time picking someone from the Rangers. I actually talked to Johnny about this yesterday on Morning Cup of Hockey. That is it Zibanejad? Is it Trocheck? In the Panthers series, Barkov and Tkachuk are kind of mostly indistinguishable. Wyatt Johnson would certainly be on my list somewhere. And then you've got to have a goalie in there. Right now, Ottinger is probably right at the top of the list too. So those would be my 3 if I were looking at it right now. Ottinger, Johnson, and Draisaitl. But reminder, we are not yet halfway there.
We are not halfway there, but our friends at Bet365 do have odds up, and Jake Ottinger is the leader at plus 700. Connor McDavid, Igor Shesterkin round out the top 3 at plus 750.
And that's kind of the other amazing part of Game 4 for the Oilers. Connor McDavid was fine, but for him, he was mostly just McDavid average.
All right, just to have some fun, because Owen put it in the chat, hashtag Pickard for Smythe. What do you think? They have him on the list. What do you think his odds are?
I'd say here's the rub for the Oilers. They're going to have to go back to Stuart Skinner at some point, because with all due respect to Pickard, the ceiling for Skinner is way higher. And if they have any prayer to beat the Stars or the Avs, or if they're even to survive the Canucks, because reminder, they could very well still lose this series. You're going to have to get to Skinner again.
Pickard 500 to 1 on Bet365. Would you said
just hand me that money. We can give it to charity instead.
You mentioned they got to back to Skinner at some point. It's not Game 5 though, right? It's got to be Pickard's Crease.
It's got to be Pickard for Game 5, but then you make the call, I think, for Game 6 based on how he plays in Game 5.
Yeah. All right. Let's move along to our daily bets, brought to you by Bet365. You can sign up today and use the promo code DAILY365 to get in on a huge range of markets. Whatever the sport, whatever the moment, it's never ordinary at Bet365. Here is my same game parlay. It comes in a very nice plus 230, and it's basically betting on the Stars to align tonight in the Dallas-Colorado series. No, not just betting on a bunch of Dallas Stars. I'm betting on the 4 big guns. Wyatt Johnson to get a point, Miro Heiskanen to get a point, Nathan McKinnon to get a point, Cale Makar to get a point. All 4 of those, I mean, hey, all it could take is 1 goal on either side for this one to hit, which is what I love. Plus 230 on the payout, courtesy of our friends over at Bet365. That brings us to garbage time, Frank, and it is brought to you by Wendy's and the Wendy's app. You can download the Wendy's app today and get in on some delicious rewards. Simply download the app. It's that simple, and you could be on your way to victory. And by victory, we mean free food, fresh, never frozen beef, and more with Wendy's. Frank, garbage time. Paul Maurice, another killer quote.
Chef's kiss.
It's really good. Let's take a listen.
Paul, you definitely woke them up. They scored 11 seconds after the TV timeout there in the second period. What was the message there, and what was your thought on the goalie interference?
I don't know the exact words of the message. I felt that a little fire. I wasn't mad at them. Understood what they were going through. Just thought they needed some profanity in their life. I brought some. I don't excel a lot of things in life, but me, am I good at that? You see how I did that?
I don't excel at a lot of things in my life, but bleep me, I'm good at that. I told this story last week on Frankly Speaking. I had Panthers GM Bill Zito on, just about the energy that Paul Maurice brings to a game, and also in a very loving way, the profanity. One time, it was the day of Game 7, 2018, Jets. Paul Maurice is coaching the Jets against the Preds. I'm walking out of morning skate and just, walking toward the entrance. It just happened to be where the Jets bus was. And I'm just, minding my business, looking at my phone. Paul Maurice comes over, puts his arm around me, takes his other hand, throws in a big chew, and drops 27 F-bombs on how excited he is to play Game 7. Is this not the best thing in the world? And you're just like, It's 11:30. There's a long way between now and the game. And I say that because that's what sports should be. It's fun. It's entertaining. This is supposed to be entertainment. And I love not only that Paul Maurice has a crack at getting his first Stanley Cup and has a real authentic one at that with his Panthers team, but I just love his passion for the game. And for a guy that was not too long ago contemplating retirement, sitting on his dock, wherever that is in Manitoba fishing, and it took some convincing to get him to go to Florida, that passion's still in there somewhere, and you can see it right there.
Absolutely love it. What a beauty, Paul Maurice. That is a wrap on today's edition of the show. Tomorrow, a Thursday edition of the program, our pal John Goins is going to return. Frank will be out in Vancouver for game 5 between the Oilers and Canucks, and we'll break it all down right here on Daily Faceoff Live. Chat with you tomorrow at noon Eastern.
Thanks for tuning in to Daily Faceoff Live. Make sure you hit the subscribe button to never miss an episode.